Hello, hello, Ederson Oliveira here. This is another interview with the DNN Summit 2017 presenters, and today I have Dohrmann, I have Jason Lichon, and I have Lee Wise. I'm going to start with you, Luis. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your session?
Yeah, my name is Dohrmann. I was the founder of a company named CoSentry in 2000 in Omaha, Nebraska, and we had managed services and data centers were our focus. In 2016, April, I sold out my company to another larger data center company, so I'm currently retired. I guess I'm in between gigs, and for years I was CTO at CoSentry, one of the founders. So my job was to determine what kind of technology to use and how to secure our customers' data from the bad guys, if you will. So part of what we did was provide physical security and security around HIPAA and NIST 853. So my session this year at the DNN Summit will be focused on practical concerns, practical things you can do around the security and compliance space.
Okay, Jason, let's go for you.
All right, I'm Jason Lichon. I'm the Chief Solutions Officer at Bluebolt Incorporated. We're based in Chicago with an office in Denver as well. We're a digital agency, solution provider, another term you could call us. We've been working with DNN since our founding in 2005. Over the past couple of years, we've developed a specialized practice in site search, and I'm going to be talking to at the DNN conference about best practices with site search. And yeah, I think that's enough.
Perfect. Okay, and Lee?
I'm Lee Wise. I work for 10 Pound Gorilla. I'm a front-end designer developer. I've been working with the company since 2010. We do marketing and web development, and yeah, we specialize in using DNN, and the company's been doing it since 2003, since I think version 1 of DNN.
Very good, very good. Okay, so Luis, let me go back to you. Let me start with you there, my specific questions. What's your involvement with DNN? I'm trying to find, because usually I'm good at knowing the connection between, for instance, Jason and DNN, and Lee with DNN. I'm not sure about your connection with DNN. How did you end up on a DNN event like this?
We hosted a customer by the name of Managed.com, which is a fairly large DNN service provider. And so we helped them secure their facilities, secure their network connections. We provided firewall services and managed services for them. So we helped, and we got to know that company very well. So I'm not directly involved with DNN. If anyone asks me a very technical question with DNN, they're going to get a bad answer. But I do know what it takes to secure a company, to secure it from some of the bad guys and some of the practical implications and applications. So we've helped J.R. Brooks and the company called Managed.com in Omaha, Nebraska for years. They were, in fact, I think they were a customer of ours in 2002. So I've known them for a very long time and got to know a lot of the challenges that they might face. So that would be my involvement with DNN.
Got it. Okay. Now you just gave me the context that I needed. I mean, I know JR, I know Managed, so I have what I needed. Now let me ask you this: your session just says PCI and HIPAA. So what are you going to be doing there? Are you going to be, going through details of how to comply with those standards? What's the idea there of the session?
Yeah, the session will be a couple of things. One, what are some of the challenges an organization, maybe not of a great deal of size, would face in becoming PCI compliant? So what are the things to watch for? What are the things to understand with that compliance? And HIPAA as well, and other compliance issues. So as a lot of organizations can be smaller, can be large, that use and or provide services in .NET Nuke, but what are the requirements to make those services comply with the standards for security? And then what's going on in the industry? What are interesting things, anecdotal and otherwise, about what happens to people who don't understand how to do compliance? And or what are the things that they could do to make their life easier in that space? So if you started off your business in 2001 and were storing customers' credit cards, you were just fine. In 2005, 2006, you became a moron, and people stole the information. And when we started the data center business, a sign-in sheet on a yellow pad was what was used for security in 2000. By 2005, 2006, federal government had come out with a series of standards. The credit card people were beginning to really have problems with how to secure those things. And so we had to help a lot of our customers get compliant and understand the requirements for it. So that will be really the focus of it. And then I'll spend a little bit of time in the session maybe talking about what the future of compliance and security and authentication might be from my perspective. And that just being a really old guy with a lot of industry experience. So,
got it. One thing that I missed asking, which would be a good start there, is can you describe a little bit what is HIPAA and what is PCI? Can you just from
Sure.
a layman's in a layman's term, how would you describe PCI and HIPAA?
Yeah. So PCI is a credit card industry standard. It's called the payment card industry, and it's a group of folks, Visa, MasterCard, and some others, that have agreed on 12 standards for keeping our customers' data secure by applying best practices, and there's around 12 different components. That's as simple as what it is. And they've continued to enhance those standards, and it talks about compliance, talks about encryption, talks about how you review your code, how you do a series of things that seem really stupid. Like the very first one, when it first came out, was to change the passwords on your routers. And it would seem to be a very simple thing to do, but at one point in time, everybody used Cisco's admin password. And so over time, that's progressed to versions 1 to 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and those standards have become tougher and tougher. And they've also added in service provider certification. So if your service provider is certified to provide you with PCI compliant services, you are kind of off the hook in some of the ways. If they're not, then you have more rigor around what you have to do and more risk in your business. If someone steals your credit card information of your customers, then you look bad, there's fines and penalties. Banks might not want to do business with you, and you could end up on the front page of the paper like TJ Maxx did a few years ago. So these series of standards around PCI help organizations. It's not, you don't want to treat it as a checklist, but it in effect is a checklist of things that should be done to maintain the best effort at compliance that you have. It doesn't mean you're going to be secure. It just means that you're going to be compliant with the security standards as the industry is set out. HIPAA, on the other hand, was a series of standards about security and compliance in the healthcare space. It's set up by the federal government. It has a series of controls that basically say that only people that are allowed to should look at your patient health information records, and that you can track what those are. Well, in the early days, something as silly as having a disaster recovery plan was part of the HIPAA compliance checklist. It didn't say that you had to test it, and it didn't even say that it had to be successful. It just said that you had to have a plan. So over time, they've become third parties that certify you for PCI compliance, HIPAA compliance, business partner certification. So if you want to do business with a hospital, you may have to get a trusted partner certification. And the hospitals need .NET Nuke and content management services as well. So those are the things we'll be talking about. I'm not going to be able to get into the details of HIPAA, every one of them, because there's hundreds of controls in it. But in fact, we can talk about what the changes have been from the beginning, how organizations that maybe haven't dealt with it before can use service providers, security service providers, data center service providers to help them get compliant with and make sure that people aren't carrying medical records off.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go back to you in a bit, Luis, but let me jump to Jason here. So Jason, you'll be talking about search. To be honest with you, and we don't do many new website projects, but whenever we do, we tend not to pay too much attention on the search aspect of the website, and it's almost like an afterthought. And so what can you tell me about your strategy in terms of search within your clients? Do you always apply search? Do you apply search only for certain clients that have a lot of content? Tell me a little bit about that.
Right. Well, sorry for that
No
background
problem.
noise. So you're hit on exactly kind of a point I often make with people developing websites. They implement a platform, whether it's DNN or something like Drupal or whatever else. And a lot of times the search part of the project is simply turning it on and then walking away. No further testing of it, no massaging whatsoever. And I think that's generally speaking a mistake unless it's for the very smallest websites. If you've got a 5-page website, site search probably isn't a top priority for you. However, when you start getting into the hundreds of pages, if you start to have documents on that website or other ancillary content driven from a database or something like that, search probably needs to be on your radar. If you think about what happened over the holiday weekend after Thanksgiving, Black Friday to Cyber Monday, Amazon took something like 31% of all online orders. When we think about Amazon, obviously they've got millions of products. They're a different order of business than most of us. However, the key interface on that website is search. You don't go to Amazon and browse, you search. Obviously, we're all trained by using Amazon. We're trained by using Google. Your users, if you've got a lot of content on your website, they want to use your search to find that content. They don't want to think about how you structure your content. They don't want to figure out your menu. They'd like to go up there, type what they're looking for, and expect the website to deliver it. And when you don't, you're going to have less conversions, less traffic, and less satisfaction from your users.
Got it. Let me just mention how I search inside sites at this point in time, and maybe I'm not unique on that trick, but the way I go about searching a site, even if they have a search feature, I'm not talking about Amazon here, I'm talking about some general sites out there. I go to Google, I type in site, column, put the site URL, and then space, put the keyword. And let me tell you, I don't know how many times I have done that to my own DNNHere.com website. I've done that many, many times to find information on my own site. Anyway, this is just a quick comment. I want to actually ask you, okay, so from a technical standpoint, you create a search box there, and you have people searching your site, but how do you entice people to really use that? I'm talking about users, not so much the site owners, but the users. How do you entice them, aside from making it big? But tell me.
Well, that's a fairly, well, I think making it big is a start, making it stand out, whether it's through contrast or whatever, and I actually have examples of that in my presentation that I'll be giving. But making it effective is the other thing. So I'm going to be talking about best practice with regards to search interface, and as it's broken down into two columns. One is, what does the search box need to do? So obviously it needs to sort of call your attention. When you start typing into it, it should react, and it should give you either search suggestions or perhaps content suggestions, or both. There's a bunch of different strategies out there depending upon what your users may want and what your website's doing. And then finally, when you hit enter and you get your search results, there's best practices in terms of what you do there as well to make that site search effective. So in terms of getting users to use the search, it's making it effective, it's making it visible, and then paying attention to your analytics to understand what percentage of your users, when they come to the site, are actually touching the search. Is that going up or down? What percentage of your users, or what's your percentage of search exits? Meaning, someone comes to your site, types something in the search, gets the results, and then that's the last page they view. That's, generally speaking, that's a bad outcome. Someone searched for something on your site, didn't see the result they were hoping to find, and just left. So understanding those statistics will tell you how you're doing in terms of the effectiveness of your search and whether or not your users are expecting to want to use search.
Okay, good. So Lee, let me jump to you. Why that topic? Why DNN and Max? Tell me a little bit of why.
Yeah, so when I first started with DNN, I was coming from actually working with PHP, and I would work on a LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. And I just really like working on Macs. I just, you can call me a fanboy. I just really enjoy it. So it was no problem, working with that technology on a Mac. Very easy. I mean, they make packages. You don't even have to really do anything. You just double click and it installs all that. So when I came over to DNN and realized everything was on Windows servers and that you couldn't really run it on a Mac, it was a big struggle. And I just felt like I was really spinning my wheels. And then over the years, I found different solutions. I still work on a Mac, but working on DNN, I don't do PHP really anymore. So it was just kind of a trial by fire and just kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't. Doing it for 6 years, I've, kind of changed my workflow several times. And being at these conferences, I see most people are Windows people, but I see a few Macs out there, and especially with the designers and the front-end developers tend to be more Macs, and the back-end developers are PC. So I figured I could kind of shed some light on some tricks that I found, what works and what doesn't, so that you can still keep your Mac and work with DNN.
Got it. So it seems to be pretty obvious, but tell me, who's the audience that you are trying to attract there for this session?
I would say front-end developers, kind of beginner to intermediate level. Anyone who's really advanced, who knows what they're doing, is probably running parallels, or they have multiple computers, so they don't really have to fix that problem.
If I may say, the only reason why I would need the native Windows, and again, as you said, you can run parallels, but it's really to compile. I mean, if I need to compile, yes, I need to have either a Windows machine, or I need to have parallels, to be running parallels. But if I don't need to compile codes,
right,
there's no reason, isn't it?
Well, so what I found with working with DNN on a Mac is the biggest downside working remotely is I have to push my files. When I first started, day one with DNN, I'd make my changes and then literally drag the file into my FTP and upload it and wait. So that was kind of an extra step, something that slowed you down, especially the way that I am. I might make one change. I'll change a font size by 1 pixel, and then I have to upload it, and then change it another pixel and upload it. And so this was kind of cumbersome and really slowed down the process. So in that sense, if you were native, you wouldn't have that. Even in taking out compiling, you just save your file and check out the change.
Got it. Okay, perfect. I'll go back to you. But Luis, let's talk a little bit more here.
Sure.
So when I hear PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance, and I think about the small guy out there, trying to get their site launched, try to get their site up and running, and should also a small website be concerned about those standards? That's my question.
Yeah, I think it depends on who your customer base is, but in today's world where it wouldn't seem like a video camera on your baby would cause a problem to the internet. About 2 weeks ago, several million of those attacked a DNS service in the Northeast and took down about a third of the internet, and Amazon didn't like it. And you wouldn't think Amazon could matter. But that's a video camera for your baby or for your cat. And so because they didn't take compliance and security at all seriously, and the virus the malware that performed the attack, that gathered the bots, was based on default passwords. So that default password, stolen from a million stupid little $29 video cameras, caused the entire internet to go down because the person that created that small video camera didn't care about security through the process. So my argument is a little bit evangelistic in that the smaller the customer, the smaller the person, the less time they have to think about it, but the more important that it could be. So if you're the FBI, all you think about is security. You're paranoid. You think everybody's out to get you anyway. If you're a little guy doing .NET and you set up your install password very easily, and it allows someone to get into root access on a LAMP stack and then create havoc for other people in the organization. So small service providers, it's a very important process to think about. And part of it is just me wishing that we had an underwriter's laboratory equivalent for security and compliance, because there's not. If there was, maybe we could solve some of these simple problems. We've got to begin thinking about it, because there are people in entire sections of countries' intelligence apparatus that are out to get us. And I'm not just paranoid. I mean, it's a fact. So I think that's why it's important to everyone, is to begin to understand what those standards are, what are the best practices, and not store people's stuff in easy to get at platforms.
Can I jump on that for a second? All the data. We have a security practice at Blue Bolt, and all the data shows that smaller and medium-sized companies are growing targets for hackers. And the reasons are obvious. These companies have fewer resources to defend themselves, for one, and they're using the same technologies as the big guys. So the same techniques that allow them to crack into something that's a hardened target allows them to crack into a target that's much softer. So
absolutely,
time into that.
Okay,
perfect. That's why it should matter.
Got it. So Luis, if I ask you, one at least to me is a blurry line, and you don't need to go into extreme details here because this is not the venue to do that, but it's a bit confusing at times to see where do we draw the line, and this is a responsibility of the hosting provider, and this is a responsibility of the site owner. Can you just, I guess, talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the best tools to determine who's responsible for what are communication via service level agreement and or understanding what those certification compliances and the scopes are within those compliances. So when you host HIPAA data, there's custodians of the data, and then there's people that have access to the data. So the application developer of, or better yet, even a system administrator of an Oracle database has access to stuff that they shouldn't have access to every time. And so they're the custodian of the data, even though they're not responsible for creating the data, they can get access to the data. And understanding that person's job and defining that person's job, that's one way to do it when we have an employee. So when we have a relationship between a service provider and the customer, who's responsible for putting the data into the .NET new content management platform? Well, it's not the developer most of the time. It's the actual customer of that. So how you define that between you and your customers is the same way it should be defined with a service level agreement between a service provider and that. So if you're requiring certification, for example, for PCI, as a DSS or data security standard provider, there are authorizations and certifications and third-party audits that will determine whether or not you are responsible for that. Understanding how to do that is the responsibility of all of us. What are the, if you have the keys to the kingdom, then what do you do with those and where do you store them? And that's the challenge that we all face, is communication with your customers. Many times assumptions are made from ignorance perspective that a service provider is protecting my data in some way, that they don't understand how it's actually being protected. And many times that isn't communicated properly through the process. So that's one of the keys, is understanding who's responsible for what, so that those lines aren't so blurry, so assumptions aren't made about security.
Okay, good. Jason, you now. Let me ask you this. What are some of the biggest challenges when you are trying to implement or trying to implement a search capability on a website? I mean, tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, sure. So first sort of assessment is how's the content structured? And that's typically the content owner's biggest challenge or biggest barrier towards improving their search solution. So when we think about what makes a search solution good, a lot of times it's the faceting capabilities or content segmenting capabilities that you get to after you pump in your keyword. Again, back to Amazon, that's typically your shopping process. If you're searching for, shampoo, you type in shampoo, now you can choose your brand, you can choose male or female or whatever different attributes are of shampoo. So when we talk to folks who want a solution like that, then they point to their content and say, well, our content really isn't tagged, and how do we go about doing that? So that's one typical challenge that you have to overcome. The other thing that you might think about is, now if you've got a platform like DNN, the questions become, what can you do with the out-of-the-box search engine, or do you need to go to an outboard search engine? Typically speaking, most platforms, including DNN, Drupal, all of them, really, search is going to be something that they have, but it's not going to be a marquee level search like you would have in an outboard search engine. There's a reason why that space exists, right? So you have to understand what it is you're trying to achieve, and can you get there with the tools that you have, or do you need to bring in a bigger set of tools? I think those are the two biggest challenges that you have.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so on the description of your session, you mentioned something about a different behavior, a different user behavior compared from a desktop view of that site as compared to a mobile view of that site. So can you unpack on that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, what we're finding is that as search traffic, or as traffic goes to mobile devices, search becomes even more important. So it's one thing if you've got a mouse in your hand and you want to sort of browse over a menu structure and kind of find your way through the menu. You're less likely to want to do that on a phone. As cumbersome as it might be to type in your query on a phone, it's still better than trying to navigate through menus. And then our connections generally just aren't quite as good on the phone yet. So then you have less patience for picking a page through a menu, say, getting to that page and finding, oh, that still wasn't what I wanted. Now let me go back to the menu, find other options, click through those options. So mobile usage, we believe, drives up the importance of search. And so for that reason, that's another indicator that if your traffic is migrating to mobile devices, it's another reason to start thinking heavily about search.
Okay, great. Lee, let me ask you a question. You alluded that a little bit when you answered the last one of the last questions. I'm just curious to understand how is your workflow. And again, you don't need to be super specific here, but you mentioned about at the beginning I used to do FTP the sites from my local to the sites and all the time to be able to test. But how do you do that now? Because I would assume that you would need FTP to somewhere so you can see your code or your UI running on a DNN website. You don't have a DNN website running locally. So how do you solve that?
Right? You're going to make me give away my whole session right here.
No, I'm saying just don't go super deep here, but tell me a little bit because I got really curious about that.
So you still do have to have a DNN site remotely. That doesn't change. What changes is how to automate some of it so that it feels local, that it's very quick and you don't have to change apps, or a lot of it can even be done from the keyboard. I don't have to switch back and forth. So it is very quick. It quickens the development time so that it feels local.
Okay, good. So you answered, but you didn't answer. That's fine because you are saving that for the session. I understand that. Yep. I'm not going to go deeper there, but I'm going to ask you this. What is the one thing that you want people to leave your session knowing?
I guess just that, I guess how to problem solve, that there's always another way to do something. That with developing for DNN, that it feels like you have to do it on a PC and you have to do it locally and using Visual Studio. But that's not the case, that there are alternatives and, pros and cons, just trying to think critically and problem solve, I guess.
Perfect. And again, because now I'm curious to know your solution there, I'll be watching your session,
All right.
Luis, let's go to you now. Same question here. What is the one thing that you want people to leave your session knowing about HIPAA and PCI?
Yeah, generally speaking, I want them to leave with a more educated perspective on how to select a service provider and how to manage their own business in a more secure and compliant fashion. And not run into a lot of, at least let them leverage the information that I have about how to get the best experience in that service provider world with security and compliance.
Perfect. Good. Jason, the same thing. What do you want people to leave your session knowing? One thing.
All right. I want them to understand a little bit more about why search is growing in importance and to be better educated about judging the effectiveness of a search as it relates to best practices.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just gonna go one more round here to ask if there's anything else left there. So Lee, anything that we have mentioned, anything that we haven't talked about that you want to convey at this point?
I think something that I think is super beneficial about what I'm going to talk about, what I've found to work, is being able to do repos, like with Git, being able to do that. That's a benefit of working locally, and with this kind of workflow, that's still possible. And even you mentioned compiling. We're not compiling C#, but I compile CSS preprocessors, SAS or less, and so that there's a big advantage in working locally and being able to do that, on the fly very quickly. And so with this, you're able to do both of those. You do repos and do CSS compiling.
See, we are in a very different day and age because now client-side coding is compilable as well. Anyway, it's just a side note. Just a side note here. Luis, the same to you. Anything else left to be said about your session?
Well, we want to have fun in my session, so there'll be stories and anecdotes that'll make it interesting and fun.
Awesome. Jason, same thing here. Anything else?
Well, we've talked a little bit about best practices, and that's going to be the focus of my session. At the end, however, I'm going to address a little bit about how you might go about applying some of those best practices. And the one thing I'd want to leave everyone with is that we haven't talked about is that there are solutions that you don't have to accept sort of the out-of-the-box DNN search. You can aim higher.
Got it. And you guys have a nice solution there. No advertisement here, but you guys have a nice solution for that problem as well. Very good talking to all of you guys. Thank you very much, Jason, Louis, Lee. Thank you very much, and I see you on January on Denver. Bye now.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.